All right, we really need to talk about Pokemon Sun and Moon because there have been a lot of new battle modes introduced since E3.
Yeah, at E3 they really only showed off the 4-person battle royale. Like that was the biggest feature I think you saw out of that, aside from the gameplay. But since then, like you said, there's just been so much more.
Yeah, since E3, in addition to battle royale, we also just very recently got updates to the Pokemon Global Link, which is the website that currently runs with XY, Omega Ruby, Alpha Sapphire. It's getting an update for Sun and Moon.
That cancels out X and Y and Omega Ruby, which just for folks, right, who are planning to stick to those games, like you're going to have to move up if you want to continue to use whatever features you were through that side.
Yeah, for competitive play, you always have to kind of keep up with the latest installment.
That's
and
right.
They're introducing 2 new friendly competition modes. One's called just casually online competitions. Basically, it seems sort of like competitive queuing. You are going to be able to play multiplayer matches over the internet with anybody around the world.
That's so exciting.
Which is super cool. It's the equivalent of solo queuing in other competitive games, except you're always solo in Pokemon.
That's right.
Which is one of the things I love about competitive play is you relying really much,
But
really
you're not
very much on
really
yourself.
solo because you have your friends with you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was going to say we're on the same wavelength. I was going to say that your friends, your Poke friends, will carry you through the battle, and then the other one is live competitions where players can host their own tournaments with friends.
So I love this. I think that, for example, even the show, if you know this continues to grow and you guys help share and make it successful, like I think that this show can host its own Pokemon tournament.
Oh, yeah,
that folks can
absolutely.
like sign up for, and you can control. You know, are you using the Alola decks? Are you using the national decks? You're controlling the period, how many matches a day people are allowed to play. I think that's really cool. It reminds me a lot of Mario Kart 8's tournament feature, where you were able to set all of that up in game. The only strange thing to me is that this requires the website. I kind of hope that some form of setting them up does flow into the game itself, and if not, and that's it, I'm okay with it. But I kind of hope that stuff is there.
It's like a lot better than planning by hand a whole competition, because I remember like in high school and stuff we would have competitions and someone had to sit down, get all the rules written,
Get
and
the bracket.
set everything up.
Yeah.
And that's just so much more hassle. This makes it everything different.
Yeah,
much easier.
it makes it a lot easier, and it actually is a great answer to the online tournaments hosted like for Smogon rules. So there, on Smogon, if you're not familiar, there's tiers like overused Pokemon, and Smogon as a community organizes their own tiers and says these Pokemon fit in this tier, and you can use this tier and below and stuff like that. This seems to be the answer to that. Like I can go in and set up a tournament with the rule, I don't want any legendaries because I'm old school and I don't want to play with legendaries or whatever it is, which is super cool, especially if you, we'll get to that a little bit later, but if you aren't happy with current rules or you just want to try a different kind of battle mode, if you want to experiment with the new kinds of abilities or items that you wouldn't normally use with the normal rules or that aren't viable normally. Like one of my favorite things about Smogon is you can have like Little Cup, which is all baby Pokemon.
Aww.
Which of course you're never gonna have a chance to use that because they're just gonna get slaughtered, but it's really cool to get the concept of setting your own rules.
Yeah, I just hope they have some built-in sharing features for it, and if they don't, I think it's fine because like we all travel and either use Facebook or Twitter or whatnot, social platforms to get the message out about, hey, we have a cool tournament, but I think that's just as essential, right? Like giving people those tools are great, but then the next step is just making sure that they can blast that messessage and make sure that their friends know that tournament's happening. Yeah,
this is just an exciting first step, especially for Pokemon. It's been very insular. There's either Play Pokemon. I mean, this is all part of Play Pokemon essentially, but it can be kind of hard to break into if you're not familiar. And it seems like
or if you don't have people to play with around you. So that's really important.
They're giving you the tools to be able to play competitive Pokemon, which brings me to the next feature, which isn't a battle mode, but hyper training. So this is the next step of super training, essentially. So super training was introduced in Generation 6, so with X and Y, for easier EV training. So you can kind of visualize how EV training works. And before, there was a huge barrier to entry with that. And now hyper training appears to let you change your Pokemon's IVs, the base stats that you can never alter except by breeding before, which is so exciting.
Yeah, I just wonder what it does to breeding on the other hand, right? Because you have items that have been introduced like Destiny Knot, for example, and a way to like pass on 5 IVs like guaranteed between the parents to the child Pokemon from the breeding experiment.
So
I just wonder, does that like sort of die down a little, or is, like how do you balance this so that on one hand you have people doing that, and on the other you have folks choosing at level 100? Like, does doing it at level 100 make it easier? Is I guess the thing I want to know.
Maybe. I mean, I have a theory about this, and it's that you have to trade bottle caps to a man named Mr. Hyper, and this sort of reminds me of heart scales, where you could trade them for altering your moves and stuff. where there's a limited number of them, they're hard to find. So I imagine bottle caps are going to be hard to find as well. So I think...
So breeding will still be important, but if you need a little extra help, or if there's one Pokemon specifically that you're training, then you can focus on their IVs with bottle caps.
Exactly, and I think this could really come in handy with
Sure.
legendaries. Because legendaries were introduced for the 2016 season. They hadn't been allowed in competitive play for years. Legendaries were just introduced back into the competitive scene, so you can have 2 legendaries on your team, and you have to do a lot of RNG manipulation or soft resetting, and it's so tedious in order to get a legendary that's competitively viable. With the nature you want and the IVs you want, it's so time consuming to the point where I'm like, I don't even want to do this. There's ways around it, especially with the RNG stuff, but I think this could make the legendaries you caught, I mean, all the legendaries you can only catch once. So if you screw it up, you have to restart the game.
This is true. Or at least before like you caught it, essentially. Like have a save point.
Yeah, like I beat Alpha Sapphire, and now if I want to use Groudon, in a competitive team, I have to, I'm in Alpha Sapphire, so I'm not going to get Groudon, but I'd have to get a copy of Mega Ruby and then replay it and then do all that RNG and resetting.
It's a really good observation.
So,
I think that's really smart. I wonder too if then with super training, you had the idea of course, working on the EVs instead, but you also had ways to reset those stats.
The reset
and I
bag.
wonder, if you had a reset bag, which was this white bag that you would earn randomly, there was no reliable way to get it, which was kind of a bummer for me because I just wish that you had an option that it was an automatic way to get that thing versus a drop thing. There's
Instead of
still
having to
random
feed your
things.
Pokemon berries.
Yeah, just tap that screen all day and whatnot. So I wonder if that will even play into it, and to some degree I hope so, because if there's one thing that I think is valuable to the competitive meta is the idea of being able to respec and just say, oh, okay, I'm not feeling this build, I want to do this over, let me do that with a reset bag.
Exactly. And I think people, some people expressed to me that they were sort of worried like this is going to make it too easy and lower the barrier to entry too much, and I don't really think that's the intention here.
Yeah, I think it'll keep it balanced. Like the point you made with legendaries is super important too, because if you can't viably, you can't just like breed them. So like, how are you supposed to make sure that's better? And especially if they're used so much in competitive play, it's important.
It is really important, and I think Pokemon's all about being accessible to everyone, and this is just making something that a lot of people enjoy more accessible to more people.
And they've been doing that with breeding for the past 3 games. It's been getting easier and easier to get the Pokemon you want if you had the right set of items and if you follow the right regimen. Versus prior games where it was just like, who would do this? Like, why would you do this? But folks who are really competitive would do it, and that's not to disrespect those folks.
Yeah, I mean, you're still, competitive play is a lot of breeding, but it's so much more than that. There's a lot of stuff in battle that if you support the show, perhaps we will talk about more in a later episode. But I do want to get to really quickly the new battle interface they introduced at E3.
Right.
This is probably the most minor new battle thing, but I really love how it looks.
It's so sleek.
It's beautiful. I mean, they keep upgrading it, and this is just the best iteration thus far.
I agree.
It's definitely not a step back in any sense. You can keep track of stat changes, which is just handy if you're in a battle for a long time, or if you closed your 3DS and stepped away or whatever. Seeing, okay, this Pokemon has lowered accuracy and it increased its attack or whatever.
You can see just how much that's changed too. It's not just a random, ambiguous kind of like, well, I guess it's this many ticks. It's like, no, this is exactly how much your stats have changed.
Yeah.
And you can kind of, predict when you need to maybe raise your stats a little bit. So
maybe throw in a
When's-
swords dance.
like when's the best time for that now instead of just like guessing at it.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that this goes back to accessibility also is you can, it'll display whether your move is a super effective, just effective, not very effective, or not effective at all in the case of Ghost on normal and vice versa. Which I think is just helpful for new players to learn type matchups.
Yeah.
I know there's some that are kind of common sense, like water is good against fire, because in real life that's what happens.
Yeah.
But there's some, like I have little devices in my head where I'm like, when it gets cold, the ground breaks, and that's why ice is good against ground. Like, so
exactly.
it's much easier for new players, young and older, to kind of get used to the type matchups.
Yeah, and there's never been a better time. I feel like Pokemon Go is this booming success, and one thing that it is doing is sort of reuniting people with the Pokemon IP. It is free brand advertising. It is a free-to-play game.
Yeah.
But how many of those people might say, wait, there's a new generation of this game coming out, and want to reconnect with that? I think it'll be really interesting to see if that happens, and thankfully there'll be a game that's a little more accessible for them to jump into, because there is nothing more annoying sometimes than looking at it and going, there's 700 of these. I don't quite know if this what move I should be going with here,
Yeah.
or if I'm making the right decision, and
It's
that's
hard to
painful.
learn.
Yeah, it's something you can get over time, and folks have done it, but making it accessible, I think, is a great move. Really quickly with DUI, I also love that. I think last item is in the top left-hand corner. It's
last
tied
use.
to the Y button. Yeah, I love that, because before you had to jump back into the menu just to see it and be able to pick it. So having that on that screen is also just, thank goodness. Like, keep doing it. Like, this is so far the best look of that bottom screen I've seen yet.
Oh, it's excellent.
Yeah.